My name's Adam, and I'm 29. I've always been the quiet, reliable one in my family. The steady rock, the problem solver, the one who never complains. My older sister, Emily, 32, has always been the star. She's the charismatic, artsy one, the one who managed to spin every family crisis into her own spotlight. Our parents, Claire and David, have always doted on her, making me feel like the supporting actor in my own life story. Growing up, I didn't mind. I focused on my studies, landed a decent job as a software engineer, and even bought my own condo at 27. Meanwhile, Emily bounced between art projects, part-time gigs, and her latest spiritual awakening. She lived with our parents, always broke, always finding herself. I figured that as long as I stayed out of trouble and kept my head down, my time would come. I was wrong. It all started 2 years ago when Dad lost his job at the manufacturing plant where he'd worked for over 30 years. They cut him loose with a severance package that barely lasted 6 months. Mom's part-time admin job couldn't cover the bills. And soon enough, they were in real financial trouble. One night, I got a call from Mom. She was on the verge of tears, her voice trembling as she confessed they were 2 months behind on the mortgage. They didn't know what to do. I felt that old familiar tug, the sense of duty that had kept me quietly in their corner for years. So I stepped up. I covered the mortgage setup, automatic payments for their utilities, and even slipped them grocery money whenever I could. I told myself it was temporary, just until Dad got back on his feet. But he never did. He eventually found a job, but it paid less than half of what he used to make. Their expenses stayed the same, and before I knew it, I had become their financial lifeline. At first, they were grateful. Genuinely. They called me a hero, said. They didn't know what they'd do without me. But slowly things started to change. The calls became less about gratitude and more about expectation. My contributions weren't acknowledged anymore, just assumed. Meanwhile, I started hearing more and more about how much Emily was supposedly helping them. I brushed it off at first. Maybe she was pitching in. Maybe she'd finally found a steady gig, but then came Thanksgiving last year. I drove 3 hours to my parents' place, balancing a pumpkin pie I'd made from scratch on my lap, the kind Mom always says she loves. As I walked through the door, I heard my Uncle Rob raising a toast to Emily. To Emily for keeping this family together in tough times. We're so proud of you. Everyone clapped. I froze in the doorway, pie still in my hands, as my sister smiled and modestly waved off the applause. I felt my jaw tighten. This had to be a mistake. I took a deep breath, set the pie down, and moved into the kitchen to grab a beer, trying to shake off the sting. But later that night, as I was hauling trash to the garage, I overheard Emily talking to our cousin Sarah. Adam never offers to help. You know, I'm the one covering their bills, I'm the one keeping them afloat, but he just shows up with a pie once in a while and thinks that's enough. I felt my grip tighten on the garbage bag. My sister's voice, so earnest and self-sacrificing, hit me like a slap. Was this a joke? I'd been silently paying their mortgage, their utilities, their internet over $10,000 in the past year. Alone, I felt a cold rage settle in my chest, the kind that doesn't explode but simmers slowly, consuming everything it touches. I went back inside, my mind racing, but I kept my mouth shut. Confronting her in front of everyone would just turn me into the bad guy. I knew my family well enough to see that trap from a mile away. So I did the only thing I could. I started paying attention. Over the next few months, I watched as Emily continued to play the martyr she'd post on social media about supporting family no matter the cost, and make a show of checking her empty bank account whenever someone mentioned bills. She'd sigh dramatically, talk about how hard it was and how much she was sacrificing. I let it slide, hoping maybe she'd realize the truth on her own, that she'd find some scrap of decency and come clean. But she didn't. Instead, she doubled down, turning my silent support into her own personal halo. And my parents, either out of willful blindness or sheer denial, ate it up. The final straw came 3 months before Thanksgiving. I had dropped by my parents' house unannounced to fix their Wi-Fi. Mom was out, but Dad and Emily were in the kitchen talking in hushed tones. I paused in the hallway, something in their tone making me hesitate. Adam never really cared about this family, Emily was saying, her voice dripping with self-pity. He's always been distant, just throwing money at problems instead of actually being here. Dad sighed. I know, sweetheart. It's just his way, I suppose. Some people just aren't wired to care. I felt something inside me snap. Years of quiet resentment of being the overlooked son, the walking ATM, came crashing down around me. I turned on my heel, walked back to my car, and left without another word. That night, I sat down at my desk, pulled up my bank statements, and started a spreadsheet. I needed to see it all laid out to prove to myself that I wasn't just imagining this betrayal. Mortgage payments, utility bills, grocery transfers. It all added up to over $12,000 in the past 2 years. 12 grand. I had handed over without a second thought while my sister paraded around like the family savior. I closed my laptop, leaned back in my chair, and let the cold, bitter truth settle in. I had been a fool, but that was about to change. After that night, something in me shifted. I had always been the steady, reliable son, but I was done being the family's silent ATM. I decided to pull back to let them feel the absence of my contributions, but I wanted to do it carefully. I didn't just want to cut them off cold, I wanted them to see exactly how much I had been carrying on my back. The first thing I did was stop the automatic payments. It felt risky, like cutting the brake line on a car you're still driving, but I needed them to feel the impact. I figured it would take a month or two before they noticed. In the meantime, I started pulling my financial life out of their reach. I changed my passwords, set up alerts for any attempt to access my accounts, and even moved my main checking account to a different bank. I wasn't just preparing for a financial shift. I was preparing for war. Predictably, the calls started coming in about a month later. First, it was Mom. "Adam, honey, the internet's been acting up. I thought you fixed the Wi-Fi last time you were here," she asked, her voice layered with that familiar hint of guilt that always made me cave in the past. "Probably just the router." "Have you tried resetting it?" I replied, keeping my tone light. "Oh, I don't know. Your father's been so stressed, I just thought maybe it's a billing issue. You know how they are with these things," she hinted. I smiled, feeling the first glimmer of satisfaction. She was trying to bait me into admitting I hadn't paid the bill. I let the silence stretch, waiting for her to ask directly, but she never did. Instead, she quickly changed the subject to how well Emily was doing, how she'd sold a few paintings at a local gallery, and how proud they were of her. I hung up, staring at my phone, feeling a mix of relief and anger. They had really convinced themselves that Emily was carrying them. I knew it would take more than a missed internet bill to wake them up, but I was patient. I had been patient for years. I could wait a little longer. A few weeks later, Dad called. This was rarer. He usually let Mom handle the emotional calls. "Adam," he started, his voice tight. "The gas company left a notice on the door. Said we're overdue. I thought you had the automatic payment set up." I took a slow, deep breath. "I did, Dad. But I've been rethinking things. I'm not sure I can keep managing all this without some help from Emily, you know. She's living there too, right?" There was a long silence, the kind that stretches out so thin you can almost hear the strings snapping in the background. "Well, Emily's, she's struggling right now, trying to get her art career off the ground. It's a tough business," he replied, his voice a mix of guilt and exasperation. "I get it," I said, keeping my tone calm. "But I've been carrying this load for 2 years, Dad. Maybe it's time everyone pitches in." I could almost hear the gears turning in his head. The slow, reluctant realization that things were changing, that their reliable, invisible lifeline was starting to fray. I let him sit with that thought, said a quick goodbye, and hung up. But it wasn't until I got a call from Emily herself that I realized just how deep her self-delusion ran. "Adam?" she said, her tone sharp and accusatory. "Did you cancel the water bill payment?" Mom had to call the utility company and they said it hadn't been paid. "They're threatening to shut it off." I leaned back in my chair, feeling a strange calm settle over me. "Yeah, I did. I figured with all the help you've been giving them, you'd have it covered. With all those bills you're supposedly paying." There was a pause. A sharp intake of breath on her end. "What the hell is that supposed to mean?" She shot back, her voice shaking slightly. "It means," I said, slowly letting each word sink in, "that for the past 2 years I've been the one paying their mortgage, their utilities, their groceries. Over $12,000, Emily. I've kept this family afloat while you've been playing the struggling artist. And now I'm done." There was a stunned silence on the line. I could almost hear her brain scrambling to process what I'd just said, to twist it into a narrative where she was still the hero and I was the cold, uncaring brother. "You're lying," she finally spat, but there was less conviction in her voice now. "Mom and Dad know I'm the one supporting them. They've seen my receipts. Receipts that I sent you for payments I made. You've been using my money to build your little saintly image, and I let it happen, but no more." She hung up without another word, and I sat there for a long moment, staring at my phone, feeling something close to satisfaction. The first real sense of control I'd had in years. I knew what would come next. The family meetings, the frantic calls, the desperate attempts to patch up the sinking ship. I had already made my decision. I wasn't going to be the silent savior anymore. I had been used for too long. My silence mistaken for weakness. I was done being the quiet one. Now it was time for them to hear me. The fallout from my confrontation with Emily hit faster than I expected. Within days, my phone started blowing up. Mom left me 3 voicemails in a row, her voice a mixture of confusion and panic. I ignored the first 2, but by the third, curiosity got the better of me. "Adam, please call me. I don't understand what's going on. Your sister is in tears. She says you're cutting us off." "What happened?" "We've always been a family. Please just call me back." I sighed, tossing my phone onto the couch. I knew I had to address this, but part of me wanted to let them stew in their confusion a bit longer. They needed to feel the void I had left to truly understand just how much I had been doing behind the scenes. A few hours later, Dad called. His tone was sharper, more accusatory. "Adam, what is this nonsense? Your mother is upset. Emily is beside herself, and now we're getting past due notices. This isn't like you." I took a deep breath, feeling the familiar pull of guilt and obligation, but I forced myself to stand firm. This time I wouldn't let them manipulate me into silence. "Dad," I said, my voice steady, "I've been carrying this family financially for the past 2 years. Mortgage payments, utilities, groceries, you name it. I've covered it. Over 12 grand. And all I've gotten in return is my sister taking credit and you both acting like she's the savior of this family, while I'm just the distant, uncaring son. I'm done." There was a stunned silence on the other end. I could almost picture my father, his jaw tightening as he struggled to process my words, his mind racing to fit this new information into the carefully constructed narrative he had clung to for so long. "What are you talking about?" He finally managed, his voice tinged with disbelief. "Emily has been helping us. She's been making sacrifices." With my money, I interrupted. Feeling the sharp edge of my own anger for the first time, "She's been using my money to play the hero while letting you both think I'm the selfish one. I have the bank statements to prove it." "She's been lying to you, Dad," he sputtered, grasping for a response. "That can't be right. She's shown us the receipts. We've seen them. Because I sent them to her for confirmation, I thought I was being a good son, making sure you were taken care of, but all I did was hand my sister the perfect opportunity to make herself look like the golden child." Another long silence. I could almost hear the pieces falling into place in his mind, the slow, reluctant shift from disbelief to dawning realization. "Why? Why would she do that?" He whispered, his voice smaller now, stripped of the usual fatherly authority. "Because it's easier to play the martyr than actually contribute. Because she spent her whole life being the center of your universe while I was just the quiet one. In the background, the one you never had to worry about. Well, guess what? Dad, I'm done being your invisible support system." He tried to protest, his voice rising, but I cut him off. "I'll email you a breakdown of every payment I've made over the past 2 years. You can compare it to your own records if you want, but I'm done being the silent hero in this family. From now on, you're on your own." I hung up before he could respond, my heart racing, my hands shaking. For the first time in years, I felt a surge of something like freedom. A lightness I hadn't realized I'd lost. But it was tinged with bitterness, a sharp reminder of just how deeply I had let myself be taken for granted. The next day, I sent the email. I attached a spreadsheet detailing every payment I had made, from the mortgage to the electric bill to the countless emergency transfers I had made to cover unexpected expenses. I included screenshots of bank transfers, dates, amounts, everything they needed to see the truth. And then I waited. It didn't take long for the fallout to hit. Within hours, my phone started buzzing again. Texts from Mom, increasingly frantic and guilt-ridden. Voicemails from Dad, his tone shifting from confusion to anger as the reality of the situation set in. I ignored them all, letting the messages pile up like the stacks of overdue bills they had ignored for years. I needed them to sit with this to feel the full weight of their own actions. I had carried this family long enough. It was time for them to stand on their own. The final blow came a week later when I received a letter in the mail. It was from my parents, written in my mother's familiar looping cursive, the ink smudged in places where her tears had clearly fallen. "Dear Adam, we don't know what to say. We had no idea. We thought we truly believed that Emily was the one helping us, that she was sacrificing for our sake. We didn't see how much you were doing, how much you had given. We failed you. And for that, we are so deeply sorry. Please, let's talk. We can fix this. We can make things right. We just want our family back. Love, Mom and Dad." I set the letter down, my heart, a strange mix of relief and resentment. It was too little too late. The damage had been done. They had chosen their golden child over me for years, had let themselves be blinded by the comforting lie Emily had spun. And I had paid the price. But I was done paying. From now on, my loyalty would be to myself. After sending that email, I braced myself for the inevitable fallout. I knew my parents would struggle to accept the truth, to face the years of emotional and financial neglect they had piled onto me while praising Emily's hollow sacrifices. But I hadn't anticipated just how deeply they had bought into her lies. 2 days after I sent the email, my doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I checked the camera feed. It was my mother standing there in her old worn coat, her hands nervously clutching her purse. Her eyes were red, her hair disheveled. I felt a pang of guilt, a reflex honed over decades of being the responsible one, but I pushed it down. I opened the door, leaning against the frame, keeping my expression neutral. "Mom?" I said, my voice flat. "What are you doing here?" She looked up at me, eyes swimming with fresh tears. "Adam, please, we need to talk. I don't understand what's happening. Why are you doing this?" I let out a slow, controlled breath, the kind you take when you're trying not to scream. "I'm not doing anything, Mom. I'm just stopping. Stopping the silent support, the thankless bailouts, the financial crutch you've been leaning on for 2 years without even realizing it was me." Her face crumpled, the tears finally spilling over. She reached for my arm, but I stepped back, unwilling to let her physical affection break my resolve. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with that same helplessness I had seen so many times before. The look that had always broken me made me cave, made me reach for my wallet or my car keys or whatever was needed to fix the problem. "Adam," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Please, we didn't know. Emily told us. She showed us receipts. We thought she was the one helping. We had no idea. You have to believe me." I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the wave of anger and disappointment wash over me before I forced it back down. I had prepared for this, had steeled myself for this exact moment, but it still hurt more than I cared to admit. "I sent you proof." "Mom," I said, my voice cold. "I laid it all out in that email. Every bill, every transfer, every late-night rescue. I've been carrying this family financially for years, and you never even noticed. Instead, you let Emily spin her little martyr narrative while I got cast as the distant, uncaring son. I'm done playing that role." She started to sob, her shoulders shaking, her hand still reaching for me, but I didn't move. I couldn't. If I let her in now, if I softened even a little, I knew I'd be pulled right back into the same toxic cycle. "Adam, we never meant to hurt you. We just thought Emily needed more support. She's always been fragile. You're so strong, so independent. We thought you didn't need us." I felt a bitter laugh bubble up in my chest, but I forced it down, biting the inside of my cheek until I tasted blood. This was exactly the problem. They had always seen me as the one who didn't need anything, the one who could handle life on his own, while Emily was the delicate flower, the one who needed constant nurturing and praise. "That's the problem, Mom," I said, my voice sharp. "You never even thought to ask. You just assumed I'd be fine. That I didn't need your support, your love, your appreciation. Well, guess what? I'm done being the backup son. I'm done being the invisible support system for this family." I watched as her face crumpled further as the weight of my words finally seemed to hit her. She staggered back a step, her hand clutching her chest, her eyes wide with shock and pain. For a moment, I thought she might faint, but she steadied herself, her hand finding the railing beside my front steps. "Adam, please," she choked out, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Don't cut us off. Don't walk away. We're still your family." I felt a pang of something like regret, a brief flicker of the old loyalty that had kept me tethered to this thankless role for so long. But then I remembered the years of silence, the countless sacrifices, the quiet erosion of my own self-worth, and the moment passed. "I am walking away," I said, my voice firm, my jaw tight. "And you're going to have to learn to stand on your own. I can't be your safety net anymore." I stepped back, my hand tightening on the doorframe. "Take care, Mom," I said, my voice cold, my heart a tight, bitter knot in my chest. "I hope you figure things out." And then I closed the door, shutting out her sobs, her pleas, her desperate guilt-soaked whispers. I leaned against the cool wood, my breath coming in sharp, shallow bursts, my heart racing with a mixture of fear and relief. For the first time in my life, I had chosen myself. I had drawn a line, set a boundary, and refused to let guilt and obligation pull me back into the same toxic dance that had defined my family for decades. I stumbled back to my couch, collapsing into the worn cushions, my mind reeling from the confrontation. My phone buzzed in my pocket, but I ignored it, letting the messages pile up. I was done explaining myself, done justifying my choices to people who had never bothered to see me for who I really was. I sat there for a long time staring at the ceiling, letting the silence settle around me like a protective shroud. For the first time in years, I felt something like peace. A quiet, fragile sense of freedom that I had almost forgotten existed. But I knew this wasn't over. Not yet. My family had spent years building their lives around the comforting lie of Emily's self-sacrifice, and I had just ripped that lie to shreds. There would be backlash, fallout, desperate attempts to drag me back into the fold. I would have to be ready for it. But for now, I just closed my eyes, leaned back, and let the silence wash over me. The days following my confrontation with Mom were a strange blur of quiet mornings and restless nights. I felt both free and untethered, like a boat that had finally cut its anchor but wasn't sure where to drift. I kept expecting the phone to ring for another knock at my door for the inevitable family ambush, but for a while it was just silence. Then the messages started trickling in, but not from my parents. It was the extended family, cousins, aunts, uncles, people who had always been distant but suddenly felt compelled to reach out. I scrolled through their texts, their confused and concerned messages, each one a small knife twisting in my gut. "Adam, your mom's been calling me in tears. What's going on?" "Hey man, just heard from your dad." Something about a misunderstanding. "You okay, bro? What's all this drama with Emily? I thought you guys were tight." I ignored most of them, letting the messages pile up like unread emails, a mountain of emotional debris. I had no intention of sifting through. I had already said my piece, I had drawn my line. I wasn't going to let them pull me back in. But then a message from my cousin Alex caught my eye. He was one of the few family members I still respected, a guy who had managed to escape the gravitational pull of our family's toxic dynamics and build a decent life for himself. His message was short, direct, and free of the usual passive-aggressive guilt trips. I heard what happened. "Meet me for a drink." My treat. I hesitated for a moment, my thumb hovering over the screen, but then I typed a quick reply. "Sure, tomorrow night." We met at a small, dimly lit bar downtown, the kind of place where the music is just loud enough to drown out eavesdroppers, but quiet enough for a real conversation. Alex was already at the bar when I arrived, nursing a dark beer and flipping through his phone. He looked up as I approached, his face splitting into a relieved grin. "Hey man," he said, clapping me on the shoulder as I slid onto the stool beside him. "Good to see you." I forced a small smile, feeling the old familiar tension creeping back into my shoulders. I knew this wasn't just a friendly catch-up. This was a reconnaissance mission, a chance for Alex to gather intel on the latest family drama. We made small talk for a while, the usual catch-up topics: work, mutual friends, the latest family gossip. But I could see him inching toward the real reason he had called me out here, his eyes flicking toward his drink as he worked up the nerve to bring it up. So he finally said, leaning in a little closer, "What the hell is going on with you and Emily? I've been getting these weird cryptic texts from your mom. Something about you cutting the family off. That doesn't sound like you?" I took a long sip of my beer, letting the cold bitterness settle in my throat before I spoke. "Yeah, it's complicated," I said, my voice carefully neutral. "Let's just say I've been carrying a lot of weight for a long time and I finally decided to set it down." He raised an eyebrow, his expression shifting from casual curiosity to genuine concern. "Set it down? What do you mean?" I leaned back, my fingers tightening around the cool glass in my hand. I hadn't planned to spill everything here, but maybe I needed to. Maybe saying it out loud to someone who wasn't directly involved would help me make sense of the tangled mess I had created. "I've been paying their bills for 2 years, Alex," I said, my voice low but steady. "Mortgage, utilities, groceries, you name it. Over 12 grand. And the whole time Emily's been letting them think she was the one keeping the family afloat. I finally got tired of being the silent support system while she played the selfless saint." His eyes widened, his beer freezing halfway to his lips. "Wait, what? Emily's been taking credit for your money?" "Yep," I said, my jaw tightening. "And I finally called her out on it, cut them off, told them they're on their own from now on. Now my parents are acting like I just dropped a bomb on their perfect little world." He set his beer down, his fingers drumming on the bar top as he processed this. "Jesus, man. That's intense. I had no idea. I mean, I always thought Emily was a bit self-absorbed, but I didn't realize it was that bad." I shrugged. feeling a strange sense of relief at his reaction at the simple act of being believed, of having someone finally see my side of the story. Yeah, well, it's not exactly something I broadcast. I just figured, family helps family. But I'm done being their silent savior. They're going to have to figure this out on their own. He let out a low whistle, his eyes still wide with disbelief. Man, that's rough. But good for you. Seriously? I know it probably doesn't feel like it right now, but standing up for yourself like that's huge. I forced a small smile, the tightness in my chest loosening just a little. Yeah, maybe I just wish it didn't feel like I was tearing my whole world apart in the process. He clapped me on the shoulder again, his grip firm, reassuring. Hey, sometimes you have to burn the old world down to build a better one. Just don't forget you've got people who have your back. You're not alone in this. I nodded, the knot in my chest unraveling just a little more. Maybe he was right. Maybe this wasn't the end of my world, but the beginning of something new, something better. We finished our drinks, the conversation drifting back to lighter topics as the bar filled up around us, the low thrum of music and conversation drowning out the echoes of my family's betrayal. When we finally parted ways, Alex pulled me into a quick, fierce hug, his voice low but firm. Stay strong, man. You did the right thing. I watched him disappear into the night, his figure swallowed up by the city lights, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of something like hope. A small, fragile spark of possibility. I just hoped it would be enough to carry me through the coming storm. The calm after my conversation with Alex didn't last long. Within days, the full force of my family's backlash hit me like a tidal wave. It started with a late-night call from Emily, her name flashing angrily on my screen. I hesitated for a moment, then hit the green button, bracing myself for the inevitable storm. Adam, she hissed, her voice sharp and breathless. What the hell have you done? I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling as I tried to keep my tone even. I'm not sure what you mean. Emily, care to be more specific? Don't play dumb, she snapped, her voice trembling with barely contained rage. Mom and Dad are freaking out. They've been calling me nonstop, saying they're getting collection notices, utility shutoff, warnings. They don't understand what's going on and they're blaming me. You've thrown this whole family into chaos. I closed my eyes, letting her words wash over me, feeling the cold, bitter satisfaction of finally truly being heard. I'm not the one who lied to them for years, Emily. You did that all on your own. She let out a sharp, bitter laugh, the sound crackling through the phone like shattered glass. Oh, I see what this is. You're punishing them for not appreciating you, for choosing me over you. You're jealous, Adam. You always have been. Just admit it. I felt my jaw clench, the old familiar resentment rising in my chest, but I forced myself to stay calm. I wasn't going to let her twist this to turn me into the villain in my own story. Jealous. I said, my voice low and steady. Of what exactly? Of being the one who silently paid their bills for years, while you soaked up all the praise of being the family ghost, the invisible backbone, the one they only call when they need something. No, Emily, I'm not jealous, I'm just done. She sputtered, clearly taken aback by my calm, measured tone, her carefully rehearsed narrative cracking under the pressure. You can't just walk away from your family. You don't get to decide that. They need you. They've always needed you. And I needed them. I shot back, the words spilling out before I could stop them. I needed a family who saw me, who appreciated me, who didn't just take me for granted while handing you the spotlight. But that's not what I got. So yeah, I'm walking away. You can have the spotlight. Emily, I'm done being your shadow. She went silent, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps on the other end of the line. I imagined her pacing her tiny apartment, the walls closing in around her, as the reality of her lies finally started to sink in. Adam? She said, her voice suddenly small, almost pleading. Please don't do this. Don't tear this family apart. I let out a long, slow breath, feeling the last threads of my old loyalty fray, and snap. I'm not the one who tore this family apart, Emily. You did that the moment you decided my money was your spotlight? This is just the fallout. I hung up before she could respond, my heart racing, my mind spinning with the finality of it all. I had crossed a line I could never uncross, severed a bond that had been slowly strangling me for years. I felt both liberated and hollow, like I had shed a second skin but lost a piece of myself in the process. For a few blessed weeks, the calls stopped, the texts slowed, and the chaos quieted. I thought, maybe foolishly, that I had finally broken free, that I could move on and start building a life that was truly mine. But then a letter arrived. It was from my parents, the envelope thick and heavy, the kind of paper you use for legal notices or heartfelt apologies. I hesitated before opening it. my hands shaking slightly as I tore through the seal and unfolded the crisp sheets of paper inside. Dear Adam, we've had time to think about everything you said to really sit with the truth of what you revealed. It was a painful realization to see how much we had taken you for granted, how much we had allowed ourselves to be blinded by Emily's stories. We failed you, and for that, we are deeply sorry. We understand now that we put an unfair burden on you, that we took your support for granted while praising Emily for sacrifices she never made. We let ourselves believe a comforting lie because it was easier than facing the truth, easier than admitting we had failed as parents. But we want you to know that we see you now. We appreciate you and we want to make things right. We don't expect forgiveness overnight, but we hope in time you'll give us a chance to rebuild what we've broken. With love, Mom and Dad. I set the letter down, my heart a tight, twisted knot of conflicting emotions. I had wanted this, hadn't I? To be seen, to be acknowledged, to be valued for the countless sacrifices I had made. But now that I had it, it felt hollow, like a consolation prize handed out long after the game had ended. I took a deep breath, running my fingers through my hair as I tried to process the wave of emotions crashing through me. Anger, relief, betrayal, hope, all tangled together in a messy knot that I wasn't sure I'd ever fully untangle. I knew what I had to do. I grabbed my phone, typed out a short, simple response, and hit send before I could second-guess myself. I appreciate the apology, but I need time. Don't expect to hear from me for a while. And then, for the first time in years, I turned my phone off, leaned back in my chair, and let the silence envelop me. I had burned my old life to the ground, but maybe, just maybe, I could finally rise from the ashes. Story 2. For her buddy. My dad left Mom. He attempted to defraud us in court and had assets worth $400,000 years later. I handed him what was rightfully his. Hi everyone, prior to the start of today's video, I need your assistance. One of the greatest ways you can help us out is to subscribe, since we've observed the channel is losing some of its popularity. It's simple, free, and helps us continue to provide you with amazing content. Your assistance is much appreciated. Together, let's continue to build this channel. Many thanks. Let's begin the video now. Reddit. Hello, longtime lurker poster for the first time. Just before my final year at the age of 17, this whole catastrophe began. My dad tried to destroy our life, concealed money from us, and threw away our family for my mom's friend. This is how it all transpired. I, 31 male, grew up outside of Detroit in a Michigan suburb. My younger sister, Zoe, 28, is a girl, and my older brother, Ethan, 33, is a mailman. I am the middle kid. Dad was employed by a medical equipment firm as a district sales manager. Fairly priced, but nothing special. Despite raising 3 children on what amounted to a little salary, Mom, an elementary school librarian, nonetheless managed to keep our home operating. While Dad was networking with customers, she took care of everything from grocery shopping to school assistance, making her the family's glue. Although it wasn't particularly noteworthy, our existence was steady. Road excursions to Wisconsin, dells or cottage rentals in the north were the norm for family vacations. Not the summer trips to Europe that Dad's boss took. We had automobiles that were useful till they broke down. Every year, Dad would speak about getting a Lexus, but for some reason that year never arrived. He would bring home brochures for expensive cars and place them prominently on the kitchen counter as though gazing at them for a long time would somehow make them more reasonable. Every month, Dad would bring people from his college firm over to our house for a round of poker. 5 or 6 men would visit, share money, and gripe about their spouses. One of the regulars was Kevin, the vice president of Dad's business, Patricia, his wife Mom's pal Scott, too, Dad's closest pals from their fraternity days who are currently employed in commercial development. Other than running a successful commercial real estate company, Scott had no obligations and was a permanent bachelor. Scott was off to Vegas or purchasing another investment property, while Dad was unable to stop talking about public school meal programs throughout supper. In his late 40s, Scott was able to semi-retire while still earning a good living because to a small commercial real estate portfolio he had accumulated in his 30s. Every few months he would arrive to poker night in a different German vehicle and teasingly remark that he had negotiated a deal with a client. Even though Patricia was in her late 40s, she dressed and behaved as though she was attempting to obtain a spot on Real Housewives. Those blatantly evident cosmetic treatments that seemed fine on Instagram photos. Uncanny Valley, however, in person. She would wear heavy makeup when she came to our place for poker night, looking at her reflection and all that reflected back at her. Patricia was constantly wearing luxury clothes with eye-catching logos. She would start assessing our home as soon as she arrived, touching furnishings and making inquiries. "Have you ever considered upgrading these countertops?" Mom asked. Pointed questions. Laminate is quite useful. According to rumors, Kevin married her because of her family ties, which helped him get the vice president job. While Patricia struggled to climb the social ladder, he was a strategic, quiet man who had ascended the business one. Every time Patricia said anything really patronizing, he would give my mom these little contrite looks. I now believe Kevin was aware that Patricia and my dad were not getting along. He simply didn't want to publicly acknowledge it. Mom would simply grin and look for a reason to inquire about supper. She didn't act combative. Patricia obviously viewed this as a vulnerability that she could take advantage of. Mom was the kind of person who would prefer stay out of trouble than start a fight. She benefited from this quality in a school library full of boisterous children, but it also made her more susceptible to social predators like Patricia, who prey on those who are seen as weak. After her divorce, my Aunt Jen moved in with us during my junior year of high school. She was 5 years Mom's younger sister. She was blunt, unrepentant, and had a keen legal mind from her time working as a paralegal at one of the best companies in Detroit. On the weekends, she rode a Harley, possessed a concealed carry license, and was the epitome of 0F to give. When Aunt Jen was around, Patricia made her typical passive-aggressive remarks for the first time. Jen simply gazed at her till Patricia took a step back. It was similar to seeing a domestic cat suddenly become aware when a panther was about. Dad detested her presence, claims that she had a negative impact on her mother. She was the only one who saw through his nonsense from the beginning. And now I know why she never trusted him again when she saw him flirting with a cocktail server at a corporate Christmas party 2 years prior. Dad would question when she was getting back on her feet and make little jabs about her living condition. Dad and Patricia's relationship wasn't particularly subtle, even though she had a higher-paying job than he did. Conveniently, they would both need to check something in the garage or get more ice and disappear for 15 minutes during neighborhood cookouts or when it initially occurred. I didn't get the connection, but I thought it was strange. Even I, a naive adolescent, had worked it out by the 6th time. In retrospect, I believe Mom was simply in a state of profound denial, even if she appeared unaware. Sometimes I caught her staring at Dad with this detached expression, as if she were attempting to solve a missing variable math problem. Once during a neighborhood party where Patricia had been especially handsy with Dad, I heard her sobbing in the restroom. However, she pretended nothing was wrong when she came out, but Scott wasn't unaware. He gave them this disdainful glance once. But then he saw me and abruptly shifted the topic. Later on, he would tell me that he had twice attempted to warn his father off, but his father had dismissed it as harmless fun. Dad was known for that reduce, deflect, refuse. I was concentrating on college applications and keeping my GPA stable 2 months before my senior year. The text messages weren't found by mistake when our dull, everyday suburban lives fell apart and none of us were ready for the nuclear fallout. This wasn't a moment in a movie where the mother finds out about her father's infidelity while using his phone to check the weather. For months, Aunt Jen had been observing Dad's actions. At last, she persuaded his mother to look at his phone one Sunday morning. They waited until Dad was taking a shower and took his unlocked phone. While Ethan and I were at baseball practice, the genius sorted through his texts using his birth date as his passcode. They discovered hundreds of texts dating back nearly a year between him and Patricia. Plans for future communication at the relationship level. Not simply lighthearted sexting grievances over their present circumstances. It was evident from the texts that they had been sleeping together while Dad was trash-talking and Kevin was in sales meetings. Our family budget and Mom's looks. Dad had complained to Patricia about the high expense of my braces, the depleting effects of Zoe's dancing classes, and how Ethan's college tuition was stealing his retirement. He had also emailed Patricia thorough financial breakdowns of our family. In one communication, he informed Patricia that he felt ashamed when people inquired about his wife's occupation and that Mom's librarian pay was pitiful. The man who had urged Mom to accept that job since the hours aligned with our school calendar is saying this. Unlike in movies, Mom didn't yell or hurl plates. The next morning, she phoned a lawyer after systematically taking pictures of everything and sending them to her email. She was introduced to Catherine Schultz, one of the state's leading divorce lawyers, by Aunt Jen. In Michigan's legal community, Miss Schultz was a legend. She was known for thoroughly discrediting unfaithful husbands in court. The walls of her office were plastered with notes of gratitude from the ladies she had worked with. Jen felt she was worth the $400 hourly retainer since she had worked with her on 3 prior instances. 3 days later, when Mom finally faced Dad, he used every possible gaslighting tactic. I was in the kitchen, purportedly working on my schoolwork, but in reality, I was listening to everything that was spoken through our dining room's thin walls. You're acting suspiciously. Patricia is only a coworker, buddy. The meaning of such messages is different from what you may believe. When your sister instills notions in your mind, this is what occurs. When his mother displayed the screen grabs to him, in a matter of seconds, he turned from defensive to calculating. The high-pitched innocence in his voice gave way to a deep, menacing calm. You gained access to my personal phone. That is a privacy violation. Mom just gave him a chilly look. And I have the right to sue you for violating our prenuptial agreement's fidelity provision. You have an option. I had no idea that they had a prenuptial agreement. It turns out that prior to the wedding, Mom's parents had insisted on safeguarding the tiny fortune her grandmother had left her. Dad hadn't given it much consideration before signing it. Since at the time Mom had no tangible assets, he would ultimately fail because of the prenuptial agreement. That evening, while packing, Dad moved out. He persisted in attempting various strategies, including guilt trips about how severing the family would ruin the children and covert financial threats. A neighbor informed us 2 days later that he had immediately moved into Patricia's McMansion in the exclusive neighborhood across town. On the day after Dad left, Scott stopped by the home. In our kitchen, he stood clumsily moving his weight from foot to foot as if he were worried that the floor would give way beneath him. Your dad is making a big mistake here, Alex. I attempted to reason with him, but he gave Mom an envelope instead. Charity isn't here until the legal issues are resolved. It's an advance on what he owes you. Scott persisted despite Mom's attempts to decline. I have known your spouse for 20 years. I am aware of his methods. He has already sent funds. Think of this as a loan. Until your lawyer confronts his nonsense. When he departed, Mom started crying. It was the first genuine emotion I had witnessed in her since discovering the letters. While the judicial system caught up to Dad's financial antics, the envelope had enough money to cover grocery and home payments for 2 months. Later, I learned that Scott had been keeping tabs on Dad's financial activities for months, seeing how he had been progressively moving money to secret accounts, lending money to fictitious businesses, and creating a financial escape route. Scott had acted foolishly throughout those transactions, even assisting Dad in opening some of the accounts while maintaining thorough records that he would subsequently give to Mom's attorney. Dad started by removing access to all joint accounts, including bank savings and credit cards. He even pledged to keep the college fund accounts in our names, but he kept them in himself. He changed all the passwords, phoned the banks the day after he moved out, and basically left a lady with 3 children and a mortgage in a precarious financial situation. His second action was to file for full custody of Zoe, who was 14 at the time, alleging that her mother was reckless with money and emotionally unstable. He didn't do this because he genuinely wanted custody. It was a calculated tactic to lower alimony and child support. Dad was aware that Mom would stop at nothing to keep Zoe, even if it meant earning less money. An interim order granting Dad weekend visitation was issued by Judge Pearson, the first judge assigned to our case. Judge Pearson was a friend of Dad's lawyer from a country club. Even yet, our mother has always been our main caretaker. Later, we learned that Pearson's re-election campaign in Michigan's county-level judicial elections the year before had received donations from Dad and his attorney. $5,000 buys a lot of favorable decisions. The custody evaluator assigned to our case was Dr. Friedman. He claimed in his original report that we'd been brainwashed by our mother to reject our father. Complete crap that overlooked the fact that we'd all seen the text messages ourselves. Ethan, who was already at Michigan State, drove 4 hours home to attend his appointment with Friedman, only to have the doctor discount everything he stated as secondhand knowledge. Even though Ethan had been home throughout multiple incidences, Dr. Friedman said in his report that Ethan showed strong evidence of parental alienation since he referenced to texts he'd read himself. I subsequently discovered out through Aunt Jen's legal contacts that Dr. Friedman had been penalized twice by the state psychology board for demonstrating prejudice in custody assessments. But the information was buried in secret disciplinary records that most attorneys never reviewed. Ms. Schultz quickly filed a request to have him removed from our case as she realized this Patricia did her part flawlessly throughout this time. The anxious stepmother-to-be, she'd come up to court in conservative blazers with minimum makeup, hair tied up looking like a PTA president. The act worked on Dr. Friedman, who quoted her extensively in his report regarding Mom's worrying behavior. Dad had given her a screenplay about Mom's drinking issue entirely invented, and Patricia did it brilliantly with faux sorrow in her eyes as she portrayed Mom's decline. But in Patricia's house, the mask slipped off. She'd critique everything Zoe did, how she filled the dishwasher, how she folded towels, even how she exhaled too loudly when watching TV. She'd have my sister redo tasks 3 or 4 times until they reached her standards. One day, Zoe accidentally used Patricia's fancy face cleanser, and Patricia lost her shit yelling that it cost more than Zoe's entire wardrobe. She'd say things like, "No wonder your father desired a getaway from your family." When Zoe or I did something that displeased her, she overhauled Zoe's whole closet, taking away inexpensive clothing and replaced them with luxury stuff. On Dad's dime, of course, that were usually little too small. Then criticizing Zoe's weight when she couldn't wear them comfortably. The financial discovery phase was when Dad's house of cards started teetering. He first claimed he only received $85,000 base salary with negligible commissions, giving tax records and pay stubs as support. What he didn't depend on was Aunt Jen's familiarity with financial fraud cases and Miss Schultz's network of forensic accountants. After more investigation, they discovered that Dad had been filtering sales commissions for years in an offshore account in the Caymans. The account was under Alpha Medical Consulting, a fictitious company that the father had set up to launder more than 40% of his real income. Additionally, they discovered emails demonstrating that he had been preparing for this divorce for at least 18 months. Shifting assets, opening several accounts, and even looking into locations with more lenient divorce rules for males. 2 years prior, emails were sent to a financial advisor inquiring about lowering alimony risk and safeguarding assets in the event of a separation. For years, Dad had been methodically concealing his income by having customers pay consulting fees to his shell firm, only declaring his basic pay on taxes and creating a hidden financial cushion that no one was aware of. Despite earning closer to $200,000 a year, he had been living as though he made $85,000. During this time, Scott turned out to be an unexpected ally after observing how Dad performed during the initial hearing. He brought papers proving his father's real salary to Miss Schultz. Dad had shown him copies of tax records and commission statements when they were thinking about investing in a rental property jointly. Even recordings of Dad boasting about concealing money from Sharon and the IRS during poker evenings. After he began to realize what his father was up to, he began surreptitiously filming the poker sessions. In Michigan, one-party permission for recordings is permissible, because to Dad's propensity to boast after drinking, therefore all of Scott's footage was acceptable. He has videos of his father giggling over Sharon's way of thinking. Last year, while talking to him about a yacht he intended to purchase with his own money, "I earned $85,000. What are you doing?" When Scott arrived with another envelope of papers, I questioned him. He seemed uneasy. "Your father is not who I believed him to be. I've also known your mother for 20 years and his treatment of her. It is incorrect, but there was more to it." Scott had been to our high school commencements, taught Ethan how to play poker, and assisted me in fixing my first vehicle. Compared to many of our biological relations, he had been a more consistent presence in our lives. He had assisted his father in creating the shell firm, believing that it would just lower his tax obligation and not defraud his family. I later discovered the true cause of his allegiance. Before she met Dad, he had fallen in love with Mom while she was a college student. Before Mom and Dad met at a school mixer, they had a brief relationship during their freshman year. After their breakup, Scott had never followed through on those sentiments, but he had also never forgotten her. A motion demonstrating the disparity between Dad's reported and real income was submitted by Miss Schultz. A thorough forensic accounting of Dad's money was mandated by the judge. Dad's attorney attempted to prevent it, but the court threatened to charge Dad with contempt if he didn't cooperate because the preliminary results were so damning. For years, not only since preparing for the divorce, the forensic accountant found that Dad had been using shell corporations to hide about 40% of his income. Systematic underreporting of revenues, frequent transfers to offshore accounts, and consultation fees paid directly by customers to circumvent business commission arrangements were all present. The most damaging was a second phone that we were unaware of, a burner cell that he used only for his conversations with Patricia and his side company until they became careless and began using his regular phone. The burner was purchased using corporate monies and registered to Alpha Medical Consulting. When his boss discovered out, he would be held accountable for yet another financial transgression. During our required weekends in their home, Patricia intensified her psychological attacks. She would make these subtle jabs about our outfits or ask whether she was dating yet. Your mom continues to shop at Kohl's. How cost-effective it seemed like mom was clothing us in trash bags the way she said it. While grumbling about having to feed an extra teen on the weekends, she would inadvertently leave her credit card statements visible, which showed $5,000 shopping sprees. When her friends visited, she would prepare extravagant meals, but for us, she would offer frozen lasagna, arguing that Zoe was too finicky to enjoy authentic cuisine. During one of our weekend visits, she had a dinner party and made us dine in the kitchen while she entertained in the dining room. When guests noticed us, she introduced us as Kevin the stepchildren. I was questioned by a visitor if I was my father's son. Patricia interrupted right away, saying that I was from Richard's past existence, like his father had been a spy or a prisoner. Instead of spending more than 20 years married to mom, Patricia had a fixation with looks. She once forced Zoe to change before heading to the grocery store because her attire didn't match the interior of the car, and she would shoot hundreds of pictures before selecting one to upload. She would even rearrange decorative pillows if they were a little off. I wish this were a lie. During our trips, she would arrange for her personal trainer and show us her pricey exercise equipment, making sure we saw the $200 price tags she had neglected to take off. While I was having breakfast, she would stretch ostentatiously in the kitchen and talk loudly on the loudspeaker to her buddies about their planned spa weekend. Dad hardly showed up for these visits. He spent most weekends away from home, either working, playing golf, or attending client dinners. When he was there, he would hide in his home office and only come out to criticize something we had done or to inquire about how we were acting. He would dismiss our attempts to explain what was going on with Patricia. That's not what Patricia would say. He would brush her off as if her word were somehow more trustworthy than his own children. Within weeks of leaving, he purchased a brand new Lexus, something he could never afford while providing for us. Evidently, Dad's well-crafted facade began to fall apart. 8 months into the divorce, evidence of at least $430,000 in concealed income over 3 years was discovered by the forensic accountant. After looking over Dr. Friedman's disciplinary record, the court granted Mrs. Schultz's official request to have him fired for demonstrating bias. Dr. Martinez was appointed as a fresh assessor. And rather than dismissing us as manipulative children, he genuinely listened to us. In contrast to Dad's account of Mom's destructive parenting, Zoe's teachers, who were questioned by Dr. Martinez, attested to the fact that she had been a contented and well-behaved student before to the divorce. She also pointed out that Dad's sudden concern for Zoe's welfare coincided with his financial obligations related to custody, which was suspicious. Dad chose to escalate rather than back down. In an attempt to get Mom to say something he could use against him in court, he began recording every conversation they had. He would unexpectedly show up at my football games and start a fight with the coaches about wanting to film from the sidelines. After that record, Mom's response when she requests that he leave the restricted area, he attempted bribing us after that, failed promises of cars for our 18th birthday, spring break vacations in Cancun, and even a suggestion that we would cover the cost of any college we desired. Alex, consider your future. He would say this while holding car brochures in front of me as if I were a young child preoccupied with shiny things. I can give you what your mother cannot. He failed to realize that we had all seen the texts. We were fully aware of his opinion of us. He was seeking to get away from financial obligations. Also, Patricia's mask slips. Zoe mentioned during a weekend visit that her mother had begun attending night classes in order to earn her library science master's degree. Patricia slammed her glass so forcefully that it broke. Your mom's time is being wasted. Her underlying issues won't be resolved by any degree. Patricia grabbed Zoe's arm so firmly that it left finger-shaped bruises after she stood up for her mother. We don't argue with adults in this house. Mom documented the incident and took photos for the custody file. However, no CPS employee followed up at the time. Our hypothesis was that Dad's attorney had departmental connections. When the first report inexplicably vanished from the system, it appeared to be confirmed through her legal connections. Aunt Jen learned that in a county where the powerful knew each other, Dad's lawyer played golf once a week with the head of the local CPS office. More important than the actual evidence were those connections. I was just starting to realize how the system was biased against us. Months before the final custody hearing, the worst incident occurred. It had become his new normal for Dad to drink excessively. His flawless persona was crumbling. As the case dragged on and more financial improprieties came to light, the medical equipment company had started an internal audit after being contacted by the divorce court, and Dad was facing questions at work about discrepancies in his client accounts. Several clients had been contacted by the forensic accountant and confirmed they'd paid consulting fees directly to Dad's shell company payments that should have gone through proper company channels with appropriate commissions split. Patricia made some comment about Mom's new haircut, which Zoe had shown them pictures of. Dad laughed and called Mom desperate middle-aged cliché trying to look desirable again. Zoe, who was usually quiet during these weekends, finally snapped. At least Mom's not sleeping with someone else's husband. Dad lunged across the table and grabbed Zoe's wrist so hard she cried out, "You don't talk about Patricia that way." In her house, I stepped between them, shoving Dad back hard enough that he stumbled. Touch her again and see what happens. At 17, I was already taller than him and had been working out daily, channeling my rage into bench presses and deadlifts. Dad backed down, muttering about ungrateful brats as he retreated to the garage where he kept his drinks. I managed to record several of these instances on my phone. Not always clearly, but enough to establish what was happening. When we informed Mom, I'd acquired a second phone particularly for this reason, a cheap burner I kept hidden in my jacket ready to record at the first sign of trouble. Dad and Patricia never suspected that the polite, quiet kid was documenting everything. The judge issued a temporary restraining order after reviewing the recordings. Our weekend visits were suspended pending investigation. Dad was instructed to take anger management and alcohol evaluation rather than cooperate. Dad went nuclear. He started a smear campaign against Mom and their social circle, claiming she was alienating us and making false accusations. He convinced several mutual friends to provide affidavits about Mom's unstable behavior over the years. We lost friends we'd known since kindergarten, whose parents suddenly stopped inviting us to parties or responding to texts. Mom was ousted from the PTA board when suspicions about drug usage started spreading. Completely contrived nonsense from Dad's pals. But Scott reacted with his own statement describing years of Dad's comments about manipulating Mom, hiding assets, and the romance with Patricia that had evidently began years earlier than we realized. Scott provided emails from 5 years ago showing Dad and Patricia arranging business meetings at hotels during corporate retreats using Scott's loyalty and quiet as cover. The last straw was when Dad violated the restraining order by coming up at our house at 1 a.m., knocking on the door and yelling that Mom had wrecked his life. The cops were summoned. Dad was detained for breaking the order, public drunkenness, and resisting arrest after he took a punch at one of the cops. The dashcam film showed him raving about how we'd turned on him after everything he'd done for us. Slurring his words when the cops cuffed him, I viewed the clip at a court hearing. Seeing my father, once the image of suburban respectability, transformed to a raging alcoholic being forced into the back of a police cruiser. The arrest altered everything. Dad was freed on bond but compelled to wear an ankle monitor. His firm put him on administrative leave pending the conclusion of their internal inquiry into his financial improprieties. Patricia, feeling her meal ticket starting to break, began distancing herself. Our neighbors reported seeing Mom with other guys when Dad was at work, and her social media showed her suddenly reconnecting with former loves, laying groundwork for her next move. She'd started wearing more exposing attire to her country club net, working hard with newly divorced CEOs and widower physicians. Our final custody court was planned for August, 3 weeks before Aunt Jen returned home looking like she'd seen a ghost. She informed her mother, "You won't believe who came to the firm today. Patricia." As it happens, Patricia had spoken with a divorce lawyer at Jen's firm. Jen was unable to divulge specifics because of confidentiality. All we needed to know was the fact. Patricia was already formulating her plan of departure, observing the signs as Dad's job collapsed and his case fell apart. Scott called the week before to our hearing. He had lunch with his father, making one more attempt to reason with him. It had not been a good meeting. Since 11 a.m., Dad had been drinking. He babbled about plots against him throughout the whole of lunch. Patricia has already moved on. Mom has been visiting a plastic surgeon from her country club, Scott informed her. Your spouse is utterly disintegrating. On his phone, Scott had pictures of Patricia in a restaurant in the next town with her new target. Over across the table, holding hands while Dad attended a court-ordered mental health assessment. Known for his work on Patricia's face, The surgeon, Dr. Williams, seems to have progressed to the rest of her body. Dad looked like complete trash when he arrived at the final hearing. Patricia was noticeably missing. After reviewing the restraining order violation report, the court rejected Dad's attorney's plea for a continuance. It was the third lawyer on Dad's legal team. After their positions became unsustainable due to the financial disparities, the first two had retracted, because Dad paid cash up front. His present lawyer, a bottom feeder who specialized in defending drunk drivers, took on the case. Dad's case suffered greatly as a result of Dr. Martinez's custody review. She kept a record of the episode with Zoe, the improper remarks, and the pattern of emotional manipulation. She suggested that Mom have full custody and Dad have supervised visits. She also mentioned Dad's troubling practice of financial manipulation and how it revealed a deep-seated intent to hurt his family for personal benefit after completing anger management and alcohol treatment programs. She claimed poverty in court and emphasized how his life had instantly changed once he left us. The monetary agreement was similarly significant, based on his actual income rather than the lower amount he had indicated. Dad was forced to pay hefty child support. The judge also granted Mom the house complete legal expenses, and 60% of the funds found Dad's deliberate and methodical attempts to deceive the court. And his family were expressly mentioned in the judge's judgment as an explanation for the disproportionately harsh decision. Based on his real income over the preceding 3 years, he ordered Dad to pay $175,000 in retroactive child support. He also ordered that future payments be deducted straight from his paychecks. Dad came up to us in the parking lot as we were leaving the courthouse. Scott moved in front of us, but Dad wasn't hostile. Simply pitiful. The warning seemed as hollow as his bank accounts were soon to be, but he added, "This isn't over." The whites of his eyes had become yellow, something that hadn't been there 6 months before the first obvious symptoms of his liver deteriorating from drinking too much. We found out 2 weeks later that Patricia had moved in with her surgeon and had filed for divorce. First, she had depleted their joint finances, used the same strategy that Dad had applied to Mom. Dad was left with an empty flat and growing legal fees after she stole the artwork, nice furnishings, and even the lease on his Lexus. The internal audit of the medical equipment firm had grown, and there were suspicions that criminal charges may be brought. A number of customers had come forward to say that their father had paid them payments in exchange for referring them to particular suppliers. There was more corruption than we had previously found when Scott arrived with the news. He brought Kevin, Patricia's soon-to-be ex-husband, as a surprise guest. Kevin told his mother, "I should have warned you years ago. Patricia treated my previous wife in the same way. She has a pattern. Squeeze the life out of a married guy, destroy his house, and then go on to the next victim." After 20 years, Kevin had finally realized Patricia's deceit. After learning of Dad's offshore accounts, he looked into their finances and found Patricia had been transferring funds into secret accounts for years. Dad had coveted the VP job, but now it was in jeopardy since Kevin's wife's relationship with Dad affected his role in the company's internal probe. Although Kevin had not been aware of the financial malfeasance 3 years prior, the board was worried about the impression of impropriety. Mom thrived, completed her master's degree, was elevated to the position of district media coordinator for the entire school system, and finally began dating a good man who respected her and coached Little League. Using her share of the settlement, she renovated the kitchen, adding the cooking area she had always desired, modernizing the appliances, and installing quartz worktops in place of the laminate ones Patricia had imitated. She always appeared younger and more at ease when I visited. In the meanwhile, once Patricia departed, Dad's life fell apart. Foreclosure cost him their McMansion. After he showed up to a client presentation intoxicated, his drinking worsened, and he was eventually sacked by his employer. The only reason he escaped criminal charges was because the business did not want to deal with the bad press that would come from bringing charges against a former sales star. Instead of selling medical equipment to business clients, he worked selling insurance over the phone after moving into a dingy one-bedroom apartment. He narrowly avoided criminal charges by agreeing to a settlement that depleted what was left of his savings after the medical equipment company filed a civil suit against him for misappropriating funds. Patricia was also a victim of her own karma. Scott, who apparently kept track of everyone, claims that her marriage to her cosmetic surgeon lasted just 8 months. She had already moved on to a rich Chicago investor. She had been discovered by the surgeon duplicating his patient information, presumably in search of additional affluent people to attack. The surgeon's practice had been harmed by the subsequent medical board probe, and he had brutally divorced her with a prenuptial agreement that left her with virtually nothing. Karma wasn't finished with her, though. After discovering that she was sexting many guys, the surgeon expelled her. She attempted to move in with the Chicago man, but it turned out that being a wealthy investor meant having excellent credit and being inundated with debt. Eventually, she was forced to accept a job selling cosmetics at the same shopping center, where she used to spend hundreds of dollars every weekend. Her financial resources and social capital vanished, and she was cut off by former country club acquaintances. In an attempt to attract another rich man, she began attending networking events wearing ever less costly attire. However, news of her past had gotten out. After graduating from college, I was able to secure a lucrative position at a tech company. By the time I was 27, I had sold my firm to a healthcare company for enough money to purchase a great house and make good investments. I had created a software platform for tracking medical equipment that was used by multiple hospitals. Patricia, of all people, began sending the messages at that point recently. Alex, you and your siblings have been on my mind. I hope the past is not a source of animosity. Reconnecting would be lovely. That meant exactly what I knew. Her decline was evident on social media. Dad gave her son a call 2 days later. I've been thinking a lot lately. I've been sober for 9 months. Changed things for the better. I read about your accomplishment in the business journal. I'm very proud of you. I let him go on talking about his rehabilitation and how he was rebuilding his life one day at a time. What he truly meant was he needed money. His medical insurance had lapsed and he'd been diagnosed with early cirrhosis. The frequent drinking had finally caught up with him. Scott called to congratulate me on the company's sale. There's something you should know, he said. Your dad and Patricia have been reaching out to everyone from the old days seeking for ties to you. They've heard about your achievements. Scott got a kick out of the scheme. When I told him I decided to set up a small surprise, I invited them both to the same restaurant on the same night, telling both I wanted to meet discreetly. I scheduled reservations at neighboring tables with staggered arrival times, so they'd surely run into each other. I selected the restaurant carefully, the same posh location where Dad had previously brought Patricia while telling Mom he was working late. The expression on their faces when they discovered what I'd done was worth every dime of that supper. Dad, who is 20 years old, is still dressed in the same sports coat he wore during the divorce. Fast fashion knockoffs have taken the place of Patricia's expensive clothing. It's obvious that she neglected her plastic surgery. I don't understand, Patricia began. I assumed that the purpose of this private meal was to talk about a business potential. For her, I completed. Or was it to get back in touch with relatives? In Dad's instance, I crossed the table with 2 folders. Each included a whole dossier: bank statements, current residences, job history, and medical documents. Anything you might lawfully get given sufficient cash and the appropriate detectives. I have been keeping tabs on your circumstances, Patricia's housing issues, Dad's medical costs. I could assist. Of course I can afford to. However, I've decided not to. As Patricia continued to look toward the exit, planning her next move, Dad's hands trembled as he closed his folder. How did you, Dad, got things started? I responded. Desperation leaves a trail and money finds money. I got to my feet. I learned something from you families. Conditional allegiances, transactional. Karma is far too slow. I spent $100 on the table to cover the cost of the evening's unfinished food. Enjoy reminiscing about the past. You now have a lot of similarities. I found out 2 months later that Dad's liver illness had led to problems and that he had been taken to the hospital. The 3 of us children went more out of interest than worry. I need help. But I know I don't deserve it, he rasped. Not everything will be covered by the insurance. I leaned closer. Do you recall when you said that your bonus hadn't arrived yet and Zoe needed braces? Or when you said the insurer had rejected Mom's request for that procedure? As it happens, you had previously sent the funds to Patricia's account. A month later, I got a call from Scott. He said the words, "You're a cold bastard," but I could hear the grudging appreciation in his voice. I answered, "I learned from the best, not my father. You demonstrated to me that devotion is more important than blood." Last spring, Mom wedded that little league coach. The expense of taking children on a real vacation in Europe was divided between Ethan and me, the one Dad always said he would have but never did. Zoe is receiving a scholarship to finish college as well as my startup capital. Some might refer to what I did to Patricia and Dad as retaliation. I just refer to it as consequences. They're living with them because they made their decisions.